What's up, everybody? It's been some time. A lot has been happening in South Africa. A lot has been taking place. But last time when we were here, I was talking about toxic positivity, and I was supposed to do the last video, which was a round of, or rather a wrap up of the toxic positivity series. However, this past 2 weeks has been chaotic. Very chaotic. Around the 8th of July, President Jacob Zuma handed himself over to Escort prison right after the Constitutional Court gave the judgment. So he had a chance to appeal, or rather to apply for a reseeding of that judgment. But then what happened is that he ended up handing himself over and then to begin his 15-month sentence. Because of that, the supporters and sympathizers of President Jacob Zuma, or rather what is known as the RET faction of the African National Congress, called for a national shutdown, instigating a hashtag Free Jacob Zuma campaign. If you are one person who's familiar with most political situations, whenever a politician or rather a controversial figure in politics is arrested, there is definitely bound to be a Free That Person campaign. It happened with Nelson Mandela. It happened with many other people. It happened also with Jacob Zuma. It happened with many other politicians and activists around the country. However, with that Free Jacob Zuma campaign, there was a surge of violence, an increase of violence, so much so that it ended up catching international media. So people decided that they were going to riot and picket and close the national roads and then destroy property and also ban trucks that were carrying goods. Some were carrying cars, some were carrying serious assets which were responsible for keeping the economy of the country running, or either one sector of the economy of the country running. To our shock and surprise, the rand did not take a knock from this. But that's not the end of it. Towards 8 days into the violence, there were videos that were circulating on social media. Those videos were videos of people being murdered and killed in Phoenix. More especially black people that were murdered and killed in Phoenix, because privately gated communities took it upon themselves to defend what they call their own businesses and properties. So this was shortly after the president went live to address the nation on the level 4 lockdown regulations, and then he encouraged citizens that they must stand up and protect properties. This had a surge, or rather influenced an uprising of vigilantism within the country. When the president came for the second time to address the situation that took place after he spoke about the issue of people protecting and defending their property, he gave us stats that 212 people died, 180 of those from KZN, 32 of those from Gauteng, 2,550 arrests have been made, 161 malls were damaged, 11 warehouses, 8 factories, and 161 liquor outlets. That's a huge number. But the issue is, in all of the damage that has taken place, the crisis at most was the loss of life which the president seemed not to be quite concerned about at most. In as much as he did send condolences to most of the people who passed, the problem here is not entirely the fact that did he even speak about it, but most of the matters which were racially influenced now, because at first when the president came to address, in his address where he spoke about the level 4 lockdown regulations, he spoke about ethnic mobilization. And then that spiked up an issue wherein you had, because most of our provinces in South Africa are still divided according to the segregation or rather the segregation rule which influenced the homelands and their creation therein in the apartheid regime. So you are still bound to know that a certain province is housing a certain ethnic tribal group more than another province houses a certain ethnic tribal group. So now there was an alarming number of tribal segregation, or rather tribal discrimination against each other on social media. In what seemed like an anti-looting campaign, there was a lot of tribalism to it, because people would be like, this and this province says no to looting. This and this province says no to looting, simply because they are instigating the fact that certain provinces, according to their certain tribal narratives, are refusing to the looting spree. And now the issue is, in as much as there was an element of criminality within the spree of looting, but then the ultimate outburst of violence cannot be centered around just crime. More especially when the president's second address started off by characterizing the whole thing as a threat to our democracy. So, the question that we should be concerning ourselves with is the fact that when the president went to KZN, he does not go to Phoenix, he does not go to Chatsworth. Now, in Phoenix, according to Mam Kaula's input, she says that there are still people who are calling saying there are dead bodies that are not accounted for still on the road. By the time that the president counted about 200 people who have died because of this uprising, he was not counting the bodies that were not counted at the time. The crisis with this narrative is that it keeps us thinking that the situation is just a natural outburst of violence, and it is not a situation that has to do with a political problem that is facing the country at the moment. And the truth of the matter is, there is a political problem and we need to face it politically. And now, what is unfortunate is that most of the top figures which are in the ANC and most of the top figures which are in government have since been threatened. Either you're an instigator of violence when you speak against the current regime and its setting and what is happening, or you must keep quiet and keep the line of what the government is declaring or speaking about. If this seems to be like perhaps throwing mud or rather throwing aspersions upon the government of the time and the regime that is in charge at the moment, it is critically clear, because when the president then speaks about the fact that there was an insurrection or an attempted coup by virtue of this violence that just outbroke, and then the Minister of Defense comes out and he says this was an issue of counter-revolutionary. And then the president, the office of the presidency sent out the minister in the presidency to speak. The minister in the presidency then says that this is the position of government and we are moving with it. And then after that, the Minister of Defense comes back again and says, you know what, and as much as she had understood that this was a counter-revolutionary process or a counter-revolutionary outburst, but then she also understands where the president is coming from. If you ask me, a lot of people have lost into their political voice, into their political narrative, and their ability to be defiant towards the dominant faction in the ANC at the time. And there seems to be an axe that is wielding against each and everyone who seems to have a different tune from what the government is posing at the moment. The question that we should be engaging in is that if our democratic government was servitude to the people, and by virtue of the people, it does not mean people according to class influence, but it means people of all classes. If our government, as a democratic government that was fought for by the people before 1994, and then assumed power after 1994, 27 years later into that, the government seems to be serving the people correctly. Why would we have 1,000, a number of people, an increase of a number of people coming in to speak against the same government that is supposed to serve them? The natural nature of oppression is that wherever oppression is found, there is bound to be a natural uprising or a revolt against that oppression. It does not matter where it happens. It does not matter if it's happening in the slave trade, if it's happening in a democratic country, if it's happening in an independent state that became independent before South Africa, somewhere in the northern parts of Africa. Wherever there is oppression, the people will revolt against it. Now, there seems to be a failure within the state of government. And then when government fails, the people are left to fend for themselves. Not only are they left to fend for themselves, but they are left exposed to the idea of an insurrection. If there was, it could have been possible. The idea of a coup, if there was, it could have been possible. And not only because there could have been an insurgence or an interference of rebels, but then it could have been made possible by the fact that people are not satisfied about how the government is serving them. Everybody has the right to riot in South Africa, that we know. So when a riot then becomes into a state where now it is public violence and whatnot, the SAPS and the security forces are supposed to act. But then the minute that the government feels like there is a threat to our democracy, and their first response is not to go and speak to the people on the ground, but their first response is to quickly calling the army and calling the security forces to use the most harshest forms of violence possible committed against people who are causing the uprising, that should tell us something about this state. In their fear of being removed by the people who voted them into power, they resort to using the barrel of the gun to keep the peace. So you'd have commentators of politics being called revolutionaries in peacetime. I mean, there is no peacetime if the peace is kept by the barrel of the gun. Whoever that speaks will lose their job. Whoever that speaks will lose interest with government contracts. Whoever that speaks will be wielded with an axe. Whoever that speaks will be removed from their platform and position of influence. I mean, if that is the peace that we are talking about, the rainbow nation that we so keep on saying that this is a rainbow nation and we pride ourselves with, is the same rainbow nation that we are using our hands to hold up. My problem with Phoenix Massacre is that the media does not characterize the Phoenix Massacre as a massacre. In fact, the media hides the narrative of the Phoenix Massacre. It is only made popular by people on the ground sharing videos that they had experienced when they are there and their experiences in Phoenix. While the government says 100 and something bodies which died within this uprising belong to KZN, the people are saying it's more than 100. While people are speaking about the issue of self-defense because people were dragged out of their cars and then their cars were banned just for the mere fact that they were black. When you speak about self-defense, when you speak about people who must pick up arms and have them for their own self-defense, then you are characterized as an instigator. There is a class struggle that comes with all of these things that have happened in South Africa. There is an issue of class. There is an issue of who's comfortable at whose pain that is taking place. That is the issue that I think we must address in the next video. Because the way that things have happened within the next period of more than or less than 14 days time, it is so much to an extent it exposes not only the maturity of the democracy in South Africa, but it exposes our comprehension of democracy in South Africa. Not only there, but the cracks of that democracy. Because there seems to be two different narratives. The reality that our people are living with on the ground and the reality that the media portrays for the sake of international news. Until next time, Danko is thank you.